All right, appreciate everybody joining in person. We got a pretty nice full room here. Probably with club members, there are probably 25 or so milling around, as well as CRHS members. So we appreciate everybody online as well as in person. This is something that we're going to try and continue to do. Certainly, this is a test of the logistics of doing this. We've seen over the past 2 years how many have joined online, certainly to see what's going on, without being able to have that in-person meeting the last few months, or quarters, I should say. So we're going to hopefully use this model moving forward, where we have kind of a part of both virtual and in person, to give as much as we can to the membership. So hopefully this works out well. We'll see how it goes. First off, I want to give a huge monumental thank you to Rob Sartain, John McLaughlin, Doug Horton, for helping us move the remaining of the archives, which was primarily paper-based boxes. It was a very long day with a lot of work. I know that my phone told me that I walked 23 miles that day. And yeah, and I would bet that, you know, easily 2/3 of them were with a box or two in my hand. So just a ginormous thank you for that effort. So at this point, we no longer have any storage units in Harrisburg. All of that paper is now inside the archives, inside the museum. So when everything is finished in there, we can really start to get into the archives, start properly seeing what we have 5 million of, that we can, you know, certainly we don't need more than a certain number of copies of certain things. So we will certainly, it's gonna take a big step for the archives to really become something that is easily accessible online. You know, things will be scanned that you can search for them, or if you see something in the online archive where you're looking for something, it's going to be a lot easier for us to access. Do we have it? Do we not have it? Can we help you out? Those sorts of things. So big thank you to Rob, John, and Doug for helping out with that. The next item on my list is communication. I want to make sure that when it comes to our email lists coming from MailChimp, that you have us in your safe senders list, so we're not going to your spam. That email, you know, the membership email is the best way for us to let you know what's going on besides meetings like this. And we're seeing a lot of people either unsubscribe from that mailing list, or they're not getting it. It's going into their spam filter as such. So please make sure, you know, we just sent one out obviously yesterday regarding this meeting. We sent some other things out here earlier this month. Please make sure that's on your safe senders list. Social media with the analytics anymore, it's completely hit or miss whether you actually see something that we post on our social media. So that membership, that email, it's crucial. And especially, you know, we found that out even more so with the mess that was the quarterly earlier this year. So, you know, all of a sudden, some of us receive our quarterly, and even half of the board hadn't received theirs about 2 weeks later, and we started to notice that there was a problem. And then the emails started coming. I still haven't seen it yet. I still haven't seen it yet. Finding out that probably, you know, 75% of what was sent out was not delivered. And it was probably 8 weeks worth of back and forth, working with our printer, who was awesome in helping us, you know, try and work with the Postal Service to figure out what was going on. You know, at that point, this could have been an easy $3,000 loss on printing and shipping to get those. After, you know, Rudy, Carolyn worked a ton of time in working back and forth and trying to find these. And then all of a sudden, I'd probably say 6 weeks in trying to figure all this out, a flood of new emails comes in saying, hey, it just arrived, it just arrived, it just arrived. So if today you still have not received that first and second quarterly, which was made into one, it was a double issue, please let us know right away. We're certainly hoping that we do not have to do a reprint. If we did send out the digital copy to everyone just to make sure that everyone had seen it. It's honestly, like, of course it would happen to this issue because I think it's one of the best issues we've ever had. It's just really, really informative. I really enjoyed all the Philadelphia industry information and so forth. But please, if you have not to this point gotten your first and second double issue, let us know so we can make sure that we get one to you with that. Yes, Rudy.
Anyone that emailed me with a form in the last email, anyone that still has a form that went out last week. So if they haven't gotten it yet, it might be like Monday. But anyone that had already told me they didn't have it yet, I sent it out.
Yeah, so hopefully you could hear that. If you did fill out the form, they did go out last week. So hopefully you should have those shortly coming from Rudy. But once again, that email communication is vital for us in reaching our members. We even went so far as to Rudy forwarded the email to everyone's individual email addresses versus using MailChimp because we wanted to make sure that it was such an important message that we got that to everybody. So we took every step we could there. Along with that, unfortunately, that was probably 8 weeks worth of wasted time with us dealing with that. So now we are heavily working on the quarterly for the rest of the year here. We desperately need layout help in laying out the quarterly. We have assistance with photos, assistance with the actual articles. We can always use more assistance with those, but we do really need some layout help in getting that done. Rudy's time continues to get crunched with a number of other projects. So please email Rudy and myself if you have some Adobe experience in doing layout, and that will greatly assist us. And certainly we have some catch up now to play with wasting 8 weeks with this shipping debacle. That comes to the next point, which you may have seen our new membership levels for 2023. Unfortunately, the cost of everything in the world is, just absolutely ballooned. Printing, shipping being one of the two biggest things. So to produce 4 quarterlies, print them and ship them to you, the cost is now about $50. So in the end, for 2022, we will probably lose money on printed quarterly memberships. Obviously, the part of being a member is helping to sustain the organization and push the organization forward. We can't, unfortunately, stay at the prices that were before. So, we did send an email out showing the different levels. I'm just going to, quickly go through that. So you have a standard, family, sustaining, and now a patron membership level. And those membership levels at the base level are a digital quarterly sent to you. If you would like a printed quarterly mailed, there's a $45 fee that gets added on to that. As well as if you are international, there's a $25 fee that gets added on to that for international shipping. So just wanted to, be completely upfront on where that rise is coming from. It's 100% shipping, 100% the actual printing, because otherwise we're going to be in the red on a membership in sending out a printed quarterly. looking for towards next year locations for membership meetings. We really would like to try and do one at a model railroad throughout the year. This was a great idea that John Durant had probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 months ago, and came to me and asked about doing the event here, which I thought was a great idea. The board also agreed. And I think it's going to be a neat situation of, having the virtual meeting here, having a presenter, and then also, I'm going to try and take control of the meeting here onto my phone and walk around a little bit so the people virtually can see the layout as well. We'll see if it works, but that's my plan. So hopefully that works out. But if you have any suggestions for locations that you'd like to see us be at for next year, please, even if it's not a model railroad, let me know. We're always looking to be new, different places. See, I'm going to kind of tee this up for Jim Stanton. I received an email from a friend, Chris Carangi, who had contacted me with a fellow around the Philadelphia area, Brian, who had found a complete Conrail locomotive engineer training stand. Complete, well, Jim will let you see it, but an absolute complete setup that we took action on very quickly here in the last 3 weeks. And I will let Jim talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks very much, Brock. I think Brian worked for Conrail, didn't he?
You did.
So he had been, this was at the training center, which is Tinicum, Leicester area of Delaware County, right by Philadelphia International Airport. And Brock, if you can give me permission to screen share instead of talking about it, I'll go ahead and show everybody the photos of what was found. But Brian had come by, I believe he works for Conrail Shared Assets, and he had come by to visit customers. There's a translating facility in what is the former Westinghouse plant. And let's see here. All right, you see list of files and now photos?
Yep, we got it.
Excellent. Okay, so this was sitting in the corner of the plant, and it is absolutely filthy. It's got decades of factory dust and all kinds of material on top of it. But here it is tucked up in against the corner, and the facility is actually in the process of redoing what they do here. And this was headed for a dumpster later this year. And so you can see, let's see what the next photo's got. There you go. So there's a nice close-up shot of an EMD control stand. And this is all connected to an analog computer for the purposes of throwing conditions at engineers and, throw the levers, push the buttons, and respond accordingly. So here it is. We got it rolled outside. Like everything with the railroad, everything is bigger and everything is heavier than you think it's going to be. So we had rented a 20-foot U-Haul, and this sucker was not going to fit in the U-Haul. We were hoping to just put it right in there on its wheels, but it did not. You can see up here at the top, you see the cab signal tree. Underneath here is basically miniature versions of everything you'd find in the locomotive. There was including the air system, like everything was there, brake pipe, all of it. It was pretty wild to see. So there's another shot of the stand. Here is the computer that was behind it. And there's a cab signal box there on the left. This was on a separate trolley, but was connected through hoses and cables, pin connectors to the engineer stand. And of course, all of this weighs thousands of pounds. So very, very, very gently, we tipped it onto its side. I had to get some tools, and we took off the safety railings that were around the simulator, and thank goodness for yeah, and lots of bolts. But thank goodness for and we did find a property of Conrail sticker that looked like somebody thought of it after the fact, because of course who else would it be the property of, right? So here is how we got it into the U-Haul. So on its side and pushing the limits of the load, but thank goodness for the folks who welded that control stand to that steel platform. It was a concern, and it's hard to see there in the photo, but we put a whole bunch of bracing underneath it so that the vibration and movement of going down the highway, that control stand was supported, but the welds held the whole way, which is outstanding. There was a welding training center there as well. So things were so well welded that we were forced to keep everything together. And I'm really glad, because it would have been tempting to bust some of the welds and remove just the control stand or take the top decking off. But because we were able to move everything all in one piece, we're going to be able to display it all in one piece. Here's the U-Haul inside the former Westinghouse plant next to the Trackmobile. And here we are in Chambersburg. And I really want to show this gentleman, the older gentleman here on the right. If you don't know who he is, his name is Dave Burkholder. He is the owner of Dave's Trucking. And it is because of Dave that we have this museum where it is today, because he made it possible when everybody else wouldn't even return our phone calls or have any conversation with us. Dave was the one who made everything happen as far as moving the boxcar. And when it was time to go pick up this control stand, I moved it by U-Haul because I'm sure you've all heard different preservation stories of you went and you go and look at something and you're like, oh yes, I definitely would like to get that. And you go away and make plans and you come back a month later and it's gone. Somebody put it into a dumpster. The boss said, look, I don't want to wait. You know, they had their chance or whatever. So this is why, as soon as I looked at it, we decided to take it. But then I called Dave and said, look, I'm going to need help getting this out of the U-Haul. And he was here to help get it out. And then ever so gently, using a team of forklifts to put it back up onto its own wheels. And it is down at his facility right now because one, I need to clean it. Really need to get it all into good shape. But then two, we need to rebuild a section of the museum floor to support the weight of the simulator, because the goal is to, let me go back to the original photo. The goal is to roll this right into the museum. And if you see there on the right, there's a set of stairs. It is safety compliant. It's got staircase, it's got railings, it's got handholds. So the goal here is to scrub a dub and put this whole thing right into the museum. And you, if you were a Conrail engineer, if you trained on this simulator, you'll be able to go in the museum and climb right back up into it as if you were a student. Kids, who doesn't love please touch things in a museum? Kids will be able to climb up in there and move the throttle, move the brake, pull the brake valve, all of that stuff. And I'm going to work with our contractor to essentially build it into the museum with some lumber so that we're going to leave it on its wheels, but we're not going to have it be able to just roll around anymore. So he'll reinforce the floor to support the weight better, and then we'll put some nice wood around it so that it looks like it's built into the wall, but we'll still leave the front of it open because I want people to see all that cool stuff that's underneath the control stand. We will not have the analog computer, the instructor's trolley, in the museum. That'll go into storage in Shippensburg. We're not getting rid of it, but it's not practical to have the entire thing on display because an 86-foot boxcar is really big until you fill it with all the things we filled it up with. All right, I've rambled on long enough. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Brock, or if there's any questions.
You will have to pass back the host to me now. But, you know, we had that picture there of Dave. Dave is probably I don't know, the patron saint of the CRHS. He has done just astounding stuff for us at much expense to him. Whether it's moving the museum car itself or things like this, just a wonderful, wonderful asset and partner for us in this. The deadline for calendar entries for 2023 has passed, but if for some reason you still have some that you would like to get in, we'll give you until Sunday at midnight. Later this week, the selections will be made for next year's 2023 calendar. So let's see here. Can do that as well. Rob Sartain, you might have seen on the membership that we sent out that there's a new address on there for sending your memberships. So I think we talked about it earlier this year, but Rob Sartain is taking over the membership duties and slowly getting his feet wet. I know he has gotten a number already of membership renewals and so forth for 23. And we've also had a great number at the patron level. So it's great to have certainly that push of financial support. Obviously, the museum costs have ballooned far beyond, where we thought we would be. So as we come to the end of the year too, certainly donations are wonderful for tax write-offs before we hit December 31st. So it's very easy. You can go to the website and do that through the shop to make it easy for you. Take a quick look. I don't know if I see our presenter yet.
No.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. All right, so I'm going to get ready to hand the meeting over to our virtual presenter, which is Richard Flynn. He's going to be presenting today on the LAM program, the local area management, which really was for any railroad, definitely a staple moment in giving power back to more local, boots on the ground type management versus all up at the executive level. So I will certainly let him discuss all of that, but I have a feeling this is going to be a wonderful presentation for us. So I'm going to give him the hosting duties and let him go from there. So you're muted right now.
Good afternoon, Brock.
Good afternoon.
Nice to meet you folks.
You as well.
Are we good to go here?
We are, whenever you are.
Okay, terrific. Well, it's a real pleasure to participate in the session today. I have visited your website a couple of times, bought some of your merchandise, but I think just the first time really talking to this group together, just as being an ex-con, a lifer at Conrail, and very proud of it. I'm very pleased that this organization exists and that you folks are doing what you're doing to try and preserve what was really a special period, I think, in railroading. It certainly was for me, the years that I spent at Conrail. And it's nice to see that this group is trying to preserve a lot of what was very special. Just real briefly, a little bit about myself. So as I said, I was a lifer at Conrail, actually hired in 1970 with Penn Central. And I worked for Conrail right up until May 31 of 1999. I had 8 years in various craft positions, came into management in 1978 as a management trainee in the transportation department, and then spent the rest of my years in Philadelphia at headquarters in a variety of positions. But I think one of the things I'll just point out, and as Brock said, is what was special about what we did with local area management was that it did really bring the boots on the ground into decision making. For me, being a guy who started, in a craft position and working 8 years in the field, when I came into headquarters, it certainly was a different tone. And we got back some of the know-how and skill set that folks in the field had that really wasn't known in the ivory towers of Philadelphia. So it really was a special program. I'm going to switch to a slide deck here that I have, and I think it will be available to you folks after the program. Let me see if I can make this happen. Okay, and can everybody see that, I hope?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, we're good. So the first thing I want to point out is that local area management kind of requires you to put your heads back in the 1990s, if those of you that were around the planet at that point in time. But 1990s, a couple of things about that period. We barely had the internet. The flip phone was just starting to become a staple. Personal computers were pretty scarce in the railroad industry, and this is a story as much about a management process as it is about technology. But I'm going to focus today on the management process. And really, the thing about the 90s in the railroad industry, it really was a decade where there was tremendous change going on. As I came up in the 70s, it was when we first had capital to spend on the railroad and start to make up for the fact that the physical plant had really been run down and we didn't have much to work with. And by the 90s, we had rebuilt a lot of the railroad, and the focus started to shift from cutting costs and rationalizing and rebuilding the plant to how we were going to grow it as a business. 1987 was, of course, the year that Conrail was privatized. We had fought off the first attempt of Norfolk Southern to take over Conrail during the 80s. Then 87, we had the IPO. And then that was followed by a period when we really had to learn how to grow. And that gave way to really some changes in philosophy about how we go about running railroad. On this slide, what I really want to point out is that, what's common to railroading is trying to deal with multiple issues. We're always struggling with how to make the best utilization of the equipment we have, how to optimize local service, deal with the continuing loss of business that we had as manufacturing changed in our service area. We became more of a service economy and constantly needing to put more business into our service network. Safety and risk management obviously is always a concern in the rail industry. But if you think back to this period, Conrail had suffered really bad accident with Chase, Maryland. That really reinforced the focus on safety and risk and pushed it down into all levels of management. Dealing with the capacity of your network, there's different ways of dealing with that. Do you try and put more business on the network, or do you rationalize and cut back on your network? A lot of different approaches have been tried over the years with that. And most importantly was employees. And one thing that I really liked about my years at Conrail was that Conrail really valued the know-how of the employees at all levels in the organization. And I really didn't appreciate that at the time, but there were a tremendous amount of, there were multi-generations of railroaders. You had older school railroaders, and you had a lot of new folks that came in at Conrail. But we had a tremendous base of employees, and we had a tremendous amount of know-how. again, one of the fundamentals in railroading is how do you grow and how do you manage costs simultaneously? And that really is very difficult to do. But we had focused very heavily in the early years of Conrail on managing the cost side. And we all got really good at doing that. I remember Stanley Crane coming in and saying, we're going to save ourselves to prosperity. I also remember him later on telling us that you couldn't run the company for nothing. If your cost went to zero, you had to have a bottom line. And the only way we're going to do that is increase your revenue and increase the cost, or excuse me, the growth through more business. And that really has been a challenge right along. But in that period of the 90s, we had all sorts of things going on in the rail industry. You had the mergers of the Burlington Northern bringing in the Santa Fe. You had Union Pacific bringing in the Chicago Northwestern, and then later the SP. And then, of course, later on in the decade, we had the transactions with the Conrail split. But in the early years of the 90s, we really were making a run at how we were going to grow the business. And one of the things that was really important to that was the management approach that we had. And we had a new generation of railroaders come in. So my early years, I grew up with Stanley Crane as our chairman, Dick Hasselman as the senior VP of operations, Charlie Marshall as the head of marketing. And those guys learned a tremendous amount from those guys. But by the 90s, it was time to take some different approaches. And in 94, we had Dave Levan come in as the CEO of Conrail. David come in from the finance area, so he was not a railroader. He ran risk management for Conrail, came up under a fellow by the name of Bob Platt, who was our senior VP of finance. But Dave was a quick study on all aspects of operations. But one thing Dave valued was experience, and he brought guys into senior positions that had been around Conrail for a while, but he really gave them a chance to move into some new roles. One of them was Ron Conway. Ron was a fellow B&A guy from up here in New England, but Ron had spent his career in operations and then moved over into a variety of marketing related positions. So one of the things that started happening is Dave started rotating people around. So you had operating general managers becoming AVPs of marketing and vice versa. And along the way, Ron Conway, who would become senior VP of operations, he went into the intermodal marketing group and he met a guy by the name of John Salmon. And John Salmon had run intermodal, been in intermodal for many years. And when they started to restructure the company into the service groups, which were kind of a hybrid of having responsibility for pricing, sales, marketing, customer service, a much broader scope of responsibility. John Salmon came in and became senior VP of what became the core service group. Core service group really was the merchandise areas of the business. And that was in 94. So we were trying to figure out how we're going to grow the business. And these guys, had now, if you think about Dave and you think about Ron, you think about John, those three guys had all been forced into positions where they really weren't comfortable in them. Dave, a finance guy, now he's, coming in as CEO. He's got to deal with things he never had to deal with before. And then Ron from operations becoming more of a commercial guy, and John as a commercial guy having a much broader responsibility for the entire business. So these guys were looking for some new approaches. And one of the things that happened was in between 94 and 96 is we had a lot more involvement of trying to have things percolate from the bottom up in the company as opposed to just being mandated from the top down. And I think that came out of the cross-functional nature of how Conrail started to emerge in the 90s from a management standpoint. So I remember this very well. 96 was when Lamb, if you will, first got started, and it got started at a strategy meeting in March of 1996. And all of us that were in this core service group with John Salmon now leading us, we were all really kind of curious as to, well, what's John going to do? How's he going to run this new service group? And, you know, what are the things we're all going to be involved in? So the first thing was that when I first met John wanted me to help him launch this strategy meeting where we were going to find out together how we were going to run the core service group and how we're going to grow the business. So we planned this meeting from March of 1996. And we then, through the later months of 1986, we went through a process to figure out what that was going to be. And we did it with a whole group of folks at every level of the organization working together. So I'm going to go into that in the next section of this presentation, talk to you about what happened in that March, June to August standpoint when we really got LAM up and running. But I want to give you kind of the context of the leadership changes. And then what followed that was really later in 96 was when, you know, Dave Levan had been working on, you know, kind of a counter strategy to what's Conrail going to do with BNSF is now formed. UP has got SP and has got CNW. You know, what's going to happen in the East? So he had been working on the strategy of having the merger of equals, working with John Snow at CSX. And then we all know what happened after that. But you know, it was an interesting time period when we were working on this right in the midst of all this other stuff going on, and really was kind of a fascinating time when I think back. You're going to get the benefit of me being a pack rat here. I'm going to show you some slides that actually came from that March 1996 meeting when we first crafted out this growth strategy. It wasn't called LAM then. We were trying to come up with what we call the platform, the growth platform. And at that meeting, the founding fathers of this platform approach were the following folks. We set up two competing teams. I happen to be sitting on what was the Platform 2 team, and another, the Conrailer, Jim Schaff, on the Platform 1 team. And what's notable here is the team members. These were all folks that worked, you know, from being pricing analysts or service analysts and customer service, financial analysts. These were all, you know, folks, not management folks necessarily. We were just guys that did our jobs. And we were put in a position to be at this offsite meeting and figure out, well, what's the best way to go forward to try and grow the business. So these guys, we should be etched in stone somewhere. These are, I'd say, your initial founding fathers of this process. And the idea of having two teams was that we had some common threads, but we wanted to have two competing approaches as to how to deal with it. We all agreed that we couldn't do nothing because at that time, growth just wasn't happening. You know, we had cut costs. There's always inflation, even back in the 90s, of course. And we had to grow in order to survive. And we had to come up with the right approach to do that. So we came up with two competing approaches. One was Platform 1, one Platform 2. One was really to say, let's try and do better what we're already trying to do. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. The second was, let's really try something different and let's really go for it. And part of the two approaches was to just see how far we as a group thought Conrail could stretch in trying to do things in a different way. So the two platforms, basically the Platform 1 group, that talked about making the current process that we had at Conrail work better. So we were still going to do things to improve service. We were still going to make improvements in the physical plant, big push to make the network 286 at that point. But it really was a strategy that says, let's work within the current processes we have, and let's try and see how we can make incremental improvements. The Platform 2 team was more to look at what kind of strategic changes can we make to try and accelerate. Might be more risky, but how do we try and accelerate the chance of us making some real changes in the base of how we work so we could attain that growth faster. So the focus there was to kind of break things into 3 components. One, a network component focused on the line haul over the road piece. The second component dealing with local service. And the third component dealing with an easier to do business way of directing commerce between Conrail and its customers. So there were a lot of issues with that. And we ran our approaches to what that each platform would look like by the market managers that were going to have to implement it. With the things that we were doing that Platform 1 was looking at to see if we could accelerate those things, general consensus was didn't go far enough. It wasn't fast enough. Some of the issues with the second platform was loss of control. What do you mean you're going to let guys in the field make decisions? We're used to having a pretty strong centralized control at Conrail in the earlier years, primarily driven around trying to hold on to the cost savings and improvements, operational improvements that we had made. So there was a lot of back and forth on that, but generally folks agreed we could not do nothing. And we took a leap of faith. And after having this offsite meeting, some follow-on presentations, we all agreed that we needed to take a broader approach and try and make some structural and process changes. So with that, out of those 2 teams emerged what became the overall foundation or platform for the local focus that became local area management. And that was, we're going to focus on improving network velocity. We're going to try and focus more in the field on sales, and also trying to bring more people onto the network. And what was interesting is, during the late 80s, actually all through the 80s and into the early 90s, we were doing a lot of spin-offs. And what people started to see at Conrail was we're spinning off these territories to short lines. And the short lines were doing a great job going out there and bringing more business in. And there was a little bit of a pause that's like, hey, wait a minute, before we do this, why can't we do that? Why can't we look a little bit more like a short line? So, the focus on going out and, sale at the door. So if you already have a guy out on your railroad, why not go out and knock on his door and see if he can bring you more business? Your industrial development folks, have them work closer with your operating guys, with your train masters, even talking to the crews. The crews are out there every day. The crews know stuff that you'll never know back in headquarters. So these 3 things became really important. And of course, ease of use. The railroads still have a ways to go in terms of being easier to use, but that really was a big focus of it. We also kind of adopted this, what had been this slogan that I think was applied to a lot of things out there generally: think globally, act locally. And that kind of became our theme song and kind of the rallying point with this platform, that we still wanted to be aware of all the issues that we had, as a high cost, high service, high capital intensive industry, that had to have a certain, continuing level of focus on centralized control. But how do we tap into what's going on the ground, and how do we allow people to make decisions and act on things while not completely losing a lot of the advantage we had of having those strong controls? A key focus, and this goes back to, kind of looking at what was going on with short lines. if you look at the overall cycle time of a typical shipment, it's comprised of time at origin, the road time, the head haul road time, then the destination time, much of that at either a serving yard or a short line, the time at the customer, and then of course the return move either empty or loaded back to destination. I actually look at this slide. All these slides, by the way, are all from 1996. We did have PowerPoint back there, a version thereof. So these were all resurrected and recycled. But actually that 22-day cycle time, complete cycle time, loaded and empty cycle, that's pretty envious today, I've got to say. But the thing there that really stood out is that 64% of the time was either at the origin or destination. And Conrail had a real problem back then, and that was that we were receiving railroad. We had a much higher percentage of system-owned cars. So if we were terminating railroad in the east, we had a very high percentage of railroad-owned equipment with foreign marks. We're paying car hire on those cars. So one of the things that was really out of line at Conrail was our car hire payable, foreign car hire payable. So we had a big push to try and reduce that. That was something that Dave Levan had been asked about at we're now a publicly traded company, so we'd go to the quarterly analyst meetings and, he'd be asked, well, why do you guys have such a high foreign car hire payable? Not that you have to pay every month. What are you doing about that? So part of this became, well, how do we improve the cycle time? And, if you look here at the numbers, where's the cycle time accrue, or where does the dwell time accrue? It accrues at the origin and destination. So we came up with a model that said, let's change the responsibilities of the way guys in the ground manage in terms of their overall responsibility and focus. And I'm talking primarily, I'll say initially, the real focus was on the local train master. And if you're a train master, the primary thing was manage your crews, your costs, keep your overtime down, and make sure you don't have any accidents. And there was a whole series of reports. I remember back, reports that were existing when I started in the railroad. We had something called an S report, and it would tell you how many train starts you had. It would tell you how many crews you had on duty, how many overtime, how many doubles you had, what your elapsed time was of your cars. The thing I remember about those metrics is that you could never win. There was always some metric that was like whack-a-mole. If you knocked 5 down, the 6th one was going to pop back up. They didn't all interconnect, and it was very hard to figure out what you were allowed to do and what you weren't allowed to do. I actually remember one of the years when I was working as a yard master. I remember sitting at Beacon Park Yard in Boston, and I had a whole string of perishable cars to go back to Chicago, and we accumulated them all week. And we must have had 50 or 60 of them all lined up. And I was working on a Sunday afternoon, and I'm thinking to myself, when are we going to get to move these cars? And on Sundays, we had an imbalance of power into New England. So on Sundays, we ran light engines back up to Selkirk. And I'm thinking to myself, like, why are we running the light engines when we could take these cars back to Selkirk with the same crew, burn the same fuel? And it was really, it was many years later that I got the answer. But the answer was because light engines didn't get counted as a train start. All the costs were there, but it just didn't get knocked against you as a train start. So if you didn't have a train start, you couldn't move the cars. It just made absolutely no sense. So the approach we came up with was to change the metrics and the responsibilities of the guys in the field to include not just the cost of the crews, managing safety, but also being responsible for the cost of equipment. any rail car that was on your territory, you're now responsible for the cost of that equipment. Same thing with locomotives. And I'm talking here about primarily switchers that would be in the terminal. And then also come up with a way that would reward you if you were able to produce more revenue loads. And this was the hardest part of doing LAM, was figuring out, okay, we can decide we want to increase the decision-making with these guys. We certainly felt that they were capable of doing it. But how are you going to control it? How are you going to give them something that they could work with and know if they were making the right decisions? So we came up with the LAM scorecard. And, you know, I'm proud to tell you this was my creation. I bought a PC. I was one of the earlier nerds in the world that went out and bought a PC, and I learned how to code. Here I was not in a technical position at Conrail, never was. I was always either in operations or in the sales and marketing organization. But I really saw the strength of PCs. And when we were coming up with this, I actually just took my own personal computer, not one that Conrail issued to me, but one I bought. And I started putting together using this tool called brand new tool called Microsoft Access. Started putting together a scorecard. And we actually tapped into the Conrail mainframe system to get the information. But we created this scorecard that would start to monetize the rail cars sitting in each terminal, the crew costs, the OTE labor, overall administrative costs, and then we assigned costs for the locomotives that you had available to you in your territory, and the cost of risk associated with accidents and derailments and so forth. So this scorecard was really what enabled LAM to allow the guys in the field to make decisions, and for us to have a certain amount of control back at headquarters to see how they were doing. And it was really quite simple, that we looked at each yard in the Conrail system, each serving yard. And we said, we're going to look at what your costs have been for this baseline period. And we're going to come up with an average cost per load. And that's going to be your baseline. And if you can make that cheap, if you can make that lower, incrementally, the dollars you save are going to go against that baseline cost per car, which is now a revenue allowance. And you're going to get that revenue allowance if you increase your business against that, basically against the same cost. But you did have a revenue to offset any incremental increase in cost. And it was very easy for guys to see whether or not they were making the right decisions. The scorecard came out, I think, once a week, and it would be green if you were good, and it would be red if you were bad. So we had a revenue allowance for loads handled. That was something new. So now you're just not managing costs, but you increase business without going over an incremental cost increase. You're going to be able to get a revenue in your scorecard. We came up with a unit cost for your local and crew productivity. So you're not just managing train starts anymore. That's going against the volume of business that you're actually handling. We provided then a way for you to look at your OT&E labor, your yard support costs, something that you could focus on and see if you were utilizing that in the best way. And it was fungible. You could trade things off that you couldn't before. Equipment cycle time. Now that was translated into hard dollars against the operating department that didn't exist before. You had stations department worried about car hire, car management, dealing with that. Now it was down with the local level. Local engines translated into dollars. A lot of times you had power sitting around just in case. Now, if you could make better utilization of that power, a night crew, having that power cycle into the next day afternoon crew, where maybe it was only used by one crew a day, looking at how you could utilize the power more effectively. And then we came up with kind of a approach of charging an insurance premium. So we didn't want to knock people down for, having to absorb the full cost of their derailments or an accident, but we came up with a methodology that would basically assess an insurance payment against you for the cost of risk. So pretty cool stuff. Here's an actual, so I actually was able to pull out from my archives. This was an actual image of scorecard for Reading, PA. And you can see in there, this one actually breaks down, how we came up with the various cost factors and broke them down by each car. So, the equipment hours times a rate per hour, the crews times the cost per crew, and so forth. And this was, I'll just go through real briefly in terms of the access to this. This was pre-internet. There wasn't any internet back there. But there was this little piece of software called like PC Anywhere that basically you could remote desktop into a computer from a over the phone. So in the 90s, Conrail had consolidated all of its stations operations into the National Customer Service Center in Pittsburgh. And they had a whole bunch of computer terminals that weren't being used anymore. We repurposed those. And we used this little dial-up software program, and we had a bunch of host computers in Philadelphia, and the guys in the field could, use a modem, and they could dial in, and they could log in, and they could retrieve their scorecard. First time any of that was used, and we did it. It was totally pirated. It did not involve the Conrail IT department at all. The only thing we had to get from them was access to the data. But this was all boots on the ground, guys that worked on this LAM project were the guys that really put all this behind the scenes stuff together and made it all work. So, this whole approach that I laid out here is that, there's a culture change embedded here. With local area management. But I'm not sure what, and I was thinking about this today before I was going to go through these slides with you folks. What the word said here that were written in 1996 was that LAM drives culture change. And as I look back now, sitting, in 2022, I'm not so sure. Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe it was the culture change that drove LAM. Would LAM have happened if we didn't have a change in the management team that we had? And nothing against the guys that preceded them. Conrail would not have been there if it wasn't for guys like Stanley Crane and Dick Hasselman. We wouldn't have even got to that point. But by the 90s, when we had the railroads that have very different situations than Conrail, UP swallowing up CNW, and then SP and BNSF and Santa Fe and so forth. We really had to do some things differently. So in some respects, I think the culture change of looking at how do you involve employees, boots on the ground, from the bottom up, how do you involve them in decision making? Maybe that's what it was. The other side of it was, LAM drives culture change. Yeah, these are all the things that you see, those bullet points that you see. Those are all things that LAM did. But let me just go through this next slide here. But there were a lot of conflicts, and the LAM scorecard helped manage these conflicts between revenue goals, cost control, asset utilization, customer requirements. But what was different is we used to do it across the table with the marketing guys on one side and the operating guys on the other side. But that kind of went away. But we still had folks that were very skeptical of local area management. So yeah, maybe the success of LAM did then get more folks to buy in. But it's kind of an interesting scenario as to which drove the other. the big question has always been, well, did Lamb work? And if I had one thing I would say about the entire thing was it ended too quickly because we ran out of time. Things started in 94 with John and Ron coming in 96, we kind of launched the program. And then Conrail was over May 31, 1999. But in that period of time, it really accomplished quite a bit. And I pulled this out again. This is just old material I pulled up. Here's a typical scorecard. This was as of end of the first quarter, 1998 for Edgemoor. And you can see here that they had a original, when the baseline, when they first started with this, their baseline cost was 308 for the prior year. And they had improved that and got it down considerably. So they're in the green there at this point to the $48,000 in the green. So you multiply that by times 150 serving yards, and you started to see some real system-wide results. Here's a slide. This is from April of 98. And this is looking at the foreign actual velocity car days per load. So you can see that's the trending, definitely trending down. And the starting point of that was when Lamb was gearing up. And then here's on-time delivery index. And this was put together by a publication called Rail Business, measuring on-time performance and customer service. And you can look across there at the other Class 1 railroads at the time, and you can see Conrail was in the #1 slot, which was nice to see. Directly attributable to Lamb? Maybe not, but it was kind of interesting. It happened in that time period. And traffic performance in terms of growth of Conrail, CSX, NS, and the 1, 2, and 3 positions, showing improvement in 1998. So those are all internal things that we had. Subsequent to Lamb, there was a lot of interest in Lamb after Conrail had ceased to exist. I happened to come across a book called Red Zone Management, written by this guy, Dutch Holland. Good first name, I guess, for having a last name of Holland. I actually talked to this guy, and he had interviewed Ron Conway and had really been impressed with what was happening with Lamb, and he did his own analysis. And those are his words, using Lamb, pushing management decisions down the chain of command, improve Conrail's cycle time by 20% and save Conrail about $100 million over 2 years, and increased productivity and reduced rolling stock expenditures. So that's an outside assessment of what it looked like. I just wish it had more time, and it didn't. What made it work? People made it work. Long and short of it, people made it work. And the kind of the crowning moment for me was, I remember John Salmon and I went up to Albany. We went to a Lamb meeting. We had Lambs, and then we also had these other guys we had the Lamb program, and then it had evolved into having Rams. We had regional something managers, regional area managers. And these guys kind of oversaw the boots on the ground work to look at how they're going to improve their scorecard. And I remember John and I going up to Albany, this meeting up in Selkirk, and I was blown away that you had these teams of guys that would come in and represent, Buffalo or Syracuse or West Albany, and they'd come in with these recommendations or stories about how they had improved their productivity, how they had gone out and knocked on doors, got new business. And the guys presenting were not even the train masters. They were conductors. They were guys that went out there and really, became a part of this whole thing. And the other thing that, was here, that these guys just didn't do it because they were good guys. They did it because, one, they could see in the rail industry, everybody knows how we cut jobs and cut the workforce up until that period of time, and flat revenue. People wanted to keep their jobs. The other is Lamb also came with a payoff, and that is every division, every month, the top division in each region, if you were on a team that won, you got a bonus. So we handed out American Express gift certificates to the team that was on top every month. And it became a real competition. It almost wasn't about the money. I think it was like $500 to a team and they'd split up. But it was really a competition, and whether or not, one team could outdo the other, come up with creative ways of doing things locally. So it was really all about, setting goals and then enabling people to go act on those goals and empowering them to do it. And in the outcome of that is that if it all works well, you're increasing the productivity of your assets and you're increasing the capacity for new business opportunities. And that obviously adds up to growth. I'll just say that, this was something that I think was very unique. But, it was something that could happen if in any business, if you really let your employees go and get involved in the decision-making progress. And it's my hope that this industry that really is in a state where it's kind of backed itself into a corner in many respects, particularly with its labor relations today, is that it's a far cry from where we were, and I just hope that maybe it can happen again, and we get back to a place where employees are a lot more involved in the decision making. So with that, that's the end of my slides. I'm going to figure out how to drop these back, and then I'd be glad to answer any questions that you guys might have about the program and about what we accomplished with it.
All right, if you can pass the host back to me. We'll open up here the view to the gallery. I know we have a special guest here.
Let me see how did I do that? Did I give you back the control?
Actually, if you just hover over the CRHS president, there's three little dots you'll click on, and you'll have the opportunity to send the host back to make me the host.
All right, let me see if I can see that. Let's see. Oh, it looks like you did it. Did you do it? I can see you now, but I don't see that option.
Oh, you know what? I think I can do it. I just did it myself. So,
oh, good. Okay.
So we do have a special guest here that I will just let introduce himself to you.
All right. This is probably
John, I want you to know, if you look in the globe, it says P2.
Yeah, mine says P2 as well. Yeah.
And you colored that in.
I hand drew that in. Yeah.
I know you did. And, well, I still have it.
Well, there's a saying, I think, that says something like, everything I needed to learn in life, I learned from a bumper sticker. and that was exactly where this whole thing came from. And it was the idea, as Dick said, about you keep spinning off all this, the anthracite cluster and this cluster and that cluster. And then these guys go in and they blow the doors off of the place, and it's a whole new railroad. And so, like Dick and I said, well, how come we can't do that? And one of the other vignettes I wanted to share with you, just to maybe jog your memory a bit and maybe square mine, but when Conrail came up with this data warehouse, that was one thing that really made a lot of this possible, where instead of having data in separate silos, it all became in one place. And then Dick, with Microsoft Access, was able to go in and draw this information. And what I did is I started working in the field with the Morrisville guys, Danny O'Hara, who was the guy who ran the place. Yeah. And so I remember taking the printout of the costs that came out of the data warehouse. I sat down with Danny, and he starts going through these costs. And he says, janitorial services, we haven't seen a janitor here since the Eisenhower administration, you know? What the hell is this doing in here? So he starts going and crossing out all of these costs, because up to that point, you had all of these system costs that were just spread all over. But then when you finally put it in front of somebody, they said, I haven't seen a janitor here for decades. I'm not paying for that.
Right.
And so that became part of the data cleansing that went on. And I didn't make it to Albany, but I did go to Mount Laurel. And I went to one of those meetings where Danny was there and he puts up his scorecard. And this guy is like, he was transformed. He said, look at my operating ratio, look at my growth. We got a plan to do this. He's doing all that. And then the guy from Brown's Yard comes up and does his thing. And in another yard, you know, Pavonia. And it's like this contest that was going on about who could run their operation better, driven by this metric. And it was transformative. And I really regret that it never had a chance to really, you know, go beyond the sale of the company. But anyway, this must be the largest Platform 2 reunion yet on record. But anyway.
Yeah, probably is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting. And I'll tell you, so, you know, John really was he was the spiritual leader of this thing to, you know, it always takes a village, but, you know, he was pretty instrumental in making this thing happen. And I think there were, you know, one of the things I mentioned when I was talking is that, you know, Conrail did value the people that we had there, but, you know, there were a lot of very creative people at Conrail, and John was one of those creative people. And, you know, Lamb kind of let us all run free a little bit. And there was also that sense that, well, what the hell? I mean, you know, what are they going to do to us if we screw up?
Worse. Yeah.
But it did, you know, and I wasn't going to talk about this in any length, but there was an attempt to bring it to CSX. And it just didn't work. And, you know, it was so it needed, there was a special breed of combination of things that we had at Conrail that you just couldn't declare we're going to do local area management. You know, it didn't even call it that at the beginning. It took the fact that you were going to unleash the know-how and the knowledge that we had against some common objectives and rally people to go out there and do it, you know, and it really was special.
And let me quote Dick Flynn here. Conrail wasn't a company so much as it was a cause. It was a cause. Yeah.
That's true.
And people felt committed to the cause of taking this broken down shambles of a railroad and making it profitable and having it grow. But great presentation. And I'll have to dig through my archives to send some other stuff. I think I've got some better screen prints.
Well, you probably do. I'll tell you guys, in all seriousness, you know, I am kind of a pack rat. And, you know, I have boxes of material, you know, from that era. I also have things like I think I mentioned this to Doug Watts. Doug, by the way, knows one of your active members and actually asked me if I would come do this. I don't think Doug could make it today, but I'll pass this on to the group at large. I have, I think, a box that has every inside track magazine that was ever published by Conrail, the employee newsletter.
Yeah.
I just have a bunch of stuff like that. And, you know, I can't imagine where you guys would keep all this stuff, but, you know, I'd love to turn it over to somebody, and your organization seems to be a logical place to get that sort of stuff and keep it.
I just dumped off 5 boxes of stuff with Brock about 5 months ago. I got
Right.
four more in the attic with his name on it. So.
Send me the address, all right? And
We'll let you get back to doing it.
good seeing you, John.
Good seeing you, Dick.
Thank you very much. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation. I'm sure all here and online greatly enjoyed that. So thank you for the time. Yeah, Doug helps us a lot with lining up, you know, wonderful presenters, and certainly hit the mark again today. So we appreciate Doug for your work on that. I will certainly contact you regarding those boxes and many things. And much like you might have seen earlier, we like to rent U-Hauls and drive around and pick things up.
Okay,
So
great.
yeah, we can certainly talk about that. So much appreciated. Just give me a second here, folks. I'm going to try and switch the meeting over to my phone, and we'll get to running some trains around here. So you can certainly hang on. This is an amazing layout. I'm going to try and walk through and let you see some of the very intricate details. They have taken great care here to really model the areas as they were. So certainly follow us around if you can. A note of warning to those here in person: if you see me, you will be probably within microphone range. So just keep that in mind as I walk around. And for those of us here in person, there is some food. We do ask you to keep that here in the front part and not in the layout areas. So sorry, no food for you virtually. You'll have to grab something from your own. But thank you very much, Richard. We really appreciate that. And
Pleasure to be here.
we will certainly be in touch.
Great. Thank you much.
Yeah,
Bye-bye,
take
guys.
care.
So I've been in Hershey Shifter and Reading.
All right. I think I have this, so let's go see some trains.
Yeah, if you get her emails, then. Maybe I don't get all of them.
Yeah. So we're gonna start out. This is Harrisburg, Harris Tower, and I'm just gonna kind of slowly walk around the layout so you all can get a wonderful feel for what's here.
Hey, Lamar, you lost your train. Your engine's running by itself. You hear what I said? You lost your train. Yeah, just your engine's following me. So. I have to. They make the total. I guess it's somewhere. The horns up there on both sides there.
Okay, we're gonna keep following along here. This is looking at Easton Station. The detailed scenes everywhere are just amazing and really add to the specter of the layout. Certainly a place that needs no introduction, but Bethlehem Steel. And JU. Which comes around to the massive yard facility. our tower. You're at Auburn Street, J Tower. Five-fingered crane is working. Definitely something to see. First time you walk in here, your senses will be on overload, trying to take it all in. Still not around the entire layout on the first level yet. Amazing to see, but this is actually a door behind the area here, which gives you access to the dispatcher as well as a workroom. This is modeled after the CF branch. Reading yard. And back to where we were at the beginning in Harris Tower. So we're going to pop up to the second at Coxton Tower. So we've got some Bethgons on the move. Great to see that blue power working through the mountains. Just the detail of small scenes like this. Incredible work of the grass, trees. Neat cutaway to be able to see inside the building. So we're a little over halfway on the top rail. So this is going to bring to an end walking around the layout. We really appreciate everyone who tuned in today to watch. We want to thank Richard Flynn for a fantastic presentation. And certainly we want to thank our hosts here at the Lehigh and Keystone Valley Railroad. And thank you for supporting everything that the CRHS does. Everything we accomplish is because of members like you and your support. So thank you very much for the time today. And we hope to talk to you soon.